Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about the 2022 United States Senate elections if Donald Trump was still president today. So, as you can see on your screen that I have 34 toss-up races. This includes every single race that is up in 2022, and of course there may be eventual retirements and eventual vacancies, but as of right now, it looks as if we're entering into 2022 with 34 races up for grabs. And considering that Donald Trump losing the election caused the Capitol insurrection and the unfounded claims of election fraud, none of this would be in consideration entering into the 2022 Senate elections. None of this discussion about whether or not the election was rigged, none of this discussion about the Capitol insurrections. The only thing that really maintains its timeline is the Georgia runoff elections, where I'm going to be under the assumption the Democratic Party still has 50 Senate seats to the Republican Party's 50, but still, the GOP will be able to actually take the majority because Donald Trump would be, of course, the incumbent president, and therefore Vice President Mike Pence, a Republican, would be breaking the tie and giving the GOP control. So looking at this Senate map, we're going to actually be discussing retirements first and talk about what we would see here compared to what we're seeing right now, and pretty much just draw conclusions about the 2022 Senate elections that way. But before we do that, let's go ahead and talk about what actually brings us to this point. So let's assume that you woke up on November 4th, 2020, and the ballots have been counted, and it was very clear and very evident that Donald Trump was going to be reelected as president of the United States. He was able to retain all of the states that he carried back in 2016, not make any significant gains, not lose any states either, bringing the numbers to 306 to 232. Joe Biden wins the popular vote by 2.1%, very similarly to Hillary Clinton, by around 4 million votes. Overall turnout is at its highest point ever. Donald Trump doesn't get as many votes as Barack Obama, but Joe Biden receives more than Barack Obama, but it doesn't really matter because Donald Trump is reelected anyway. On top of that, the Senate elections look very, very similar. Looking at the 2020 Senate map, what we would see here is that the Democratic Party would make gains in Colorado and Arizona, counteracted by a gain in Alabama, with the Democrats eventually taking Georgia and Georgia's special election, but that's not enough to put them over the top. So it's very clear from that evening that the GOP will be maintaining Senate control. The House of Representatives looks very similar to how it does now. It's going to be the exact same result. So overall, we're under the assumption that the only thing that really changed, was Donald Trump being president of the United States. And I actually want to go ahead and just show you the current Senate composition. And I'm sure if you're someone who closely watches politics, you know what it looks like, but I want to show you just for argument's sake. So as you can see, the Democratic Party has some Democratic seats in some pretty competitive states. New Hampshire, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, Colorado. The GOP does as well. Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Iowa, North Carolina, and Florida. But looking at the retirements we know so far in our normal, traditional timeline, we have a retirement from Roy Blunt in Missouri, a retirement from Pat Toomey in Pennsylvania, Richard Burr in North Carolina, Rob Portman in Ohio. We have one by Richard Shelby in Alabama, which brings us to 5 total retirements. But if we're talking about a timeline where Donald Trump would be president of the United States, I would expect his approval rating to hover around where it did back in November of 2018. I expect it to be around 42 points with a 53% disapproval rating, meaning an 11-point deficit nationwide. That's actually exactly what I expect to see. Especially if COVID-19 doesn't get dramatically better, we wouldn't see Donald Trump being approved of in a very positive way. And overall, I think that with Donald Trump as president, you can't expect the vaccines to be rolling out at the same rate they are today. The vaccine turnout in the United States, let's go ahead and scroll down here and select it because I do want to talk about it. What we've seen so far in the United States is that we're getting nearly 2.5 million doses per day. If Donald Trump was president of the United States, I'm not entirely sure that would be the same exact thing. I can't assume that it would be dramatically different, but I can't assume it will be the same either because, of course, he isn't the president. We've seen many headlines about the Biden administration acquiring 200 million doses from Pfizer and Moderna ahead of the summertime. And I've also seen headlines during the Trump presidency where Donald Trump turned away 100 million doses from Pfizer and 100 million doses from Moderna because of issues with the military, but also just because this was something that was being publicized by the media, and it seemed clear that the vaccine was the most important thing for Biden and not necessarily the most important thing for Donald Trump. I think his focus was getting the economy back on track. For Joe Biden, I think it was more so just vaccine distribution and mask mandates and handling COVID-19 differently than Donald Trump. But Donald Trump almost won the presidential election, and if he was to be president, I don't think that COVID-19 would be at a point where it is today. I think we would see some different results. And that would actually mean that the GOP might be even more worried than they are currently of 2022. You see, 2022 was supposed to be this absolute red wave year, the same way 2010 and 2014 were, but we're not seeing any of those signs, at least initially. We currently have 5 retirements, and none of them are from the Democratic Party. In 2018, we saw some major retirements in the House of Representatives, none super big in the Senate election beside Arizona. And looking at the House elections, well, we saw some pretty major retirements. What you'll notice here is that a lot of these Democratic gains are from districts where Republicans decided to not run for re-election. In fact, the Speaker of the House, the 2012 vice presidential nominee, Paul Ryan, one of the most well-known names in the GOP, ended up retiring. He's not old. He's very, very young, and he has a very bright political future if he chooses to pursue it, but he decided not to run for re-election in 2018, not because he thought he would lose, but it was an indicator that other Republicans would follow suit. And when your top guy, the number 1 ranking Republican in the House of Representatives, says, "I'm out," others are surely going to follow. So I think we saw around 50 retirements here in 2018, a huge number, and they started pouring out. And, that's exactly what we're starting to see here in the Senate. But with a Donald Trump type timeline, I can guarantee you now we would see even more retirements from incumbents that are afraid of losing. Ron Johnson would have already decided to retire. He actually said he's still leaning towards retirement, but he made that promise that he would not run under the assumption the Democratic Party would not have a trifecta. Well, if Donald Trump was reelected, he would have no reason to say that statement. Donald Trump would be president, Republicans would have control of the Senate, and it would just be the same exact thing as what we saw happen in 2018 to 2020, with Democrats simply in control of the House of Representatives. Chuck Grassley also might not find it to be too electoral friendly to run for reelection. Yes, he won by 20 points over that in 2016, but 54% of Iowa voters say they don't want him to run again. He was immensely popular, but he'd be going on an 8th term here, and sometimes voters do get tired, and, that would be a very long time, and he would be in his 90s by the time he finished out his 8th term. So I can't imagine too many voters were too happy with that being in consideration. And, another retirement we could potentially see is possibly from Marco Rubio down in Florida. I think that would be an opportunity, for Marco Rubio to sort of shift focus on something else. Now, I do think that they would force him to stay in the race, so I'm not going to say absolutely that would be a retirement, but I'm very confident all 7 of the races I've characterized now would be considered retirements. I don't think John Thune in the state of South Dakota would be in a position where he would need to he would need to end up retiring. We've seen some discussion about potential retirements in Idaho, I believe, but overall, in terms of competitive races, 6 out of the 7 here, I think, would be competitive. And then, 7 out of the 7, of course, I think I would be 100% secure about in terms of overall retirement. So what this would do would essentially make all of these races that have retirements and make them competitive. We're going to get rid of this retirements block because we don't need it anymore. And then we're going to talk about the competitive races on the Democratic Party side. Well, this opens up 10 toss-up races. The Democratic Party only needs 1 in order to oust the GOP from control. And looking at what happened in 2018 in the Senate elections, well, we have some very similar states up. Now, before we get into these similar states, let's talk about the last time that this Senate map was up. It was in the 2016 election, which is this exact map. And then what you'll notice is that the GOP actually did better in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Ohio, Iowa, Florida, North Carolina than they did on the presidential level. And that was for a reason. These incumbents were popular and these incumbents were liked. Pat Toomey was someone who had a 1.5% victory here, but he's retiring. I can guarantee you that will surely be very competitive. And, I'm going to be under the assumption Ron Johnson is going to retire based off his recent comments, and he only won here by 3.4%. Moving down over to North Carolina, it was won by a pretty considerable amount, nearly 6 points, but it still was something that was not exactly safe. It's not something that's super secure. He's no longer running for Senate. Rob Portman won by 21 points. Well, he's no longer going to be running for Senate. Iowa, which had a very interesting Democratic vote share in 2018, could see a similar result to that in 2022 if Chuck Grassley decides not to run. And I can tell you this, if Donald Trump was reelected, he probably would not have run. Missouri was decided by 2.8% back in 2016. I think it could be competitive in 2022 with Donald Trump on the ballot, the same way that Tennessee had gotten closer in 2018. Yes, the GOP will be in the advantage, and they will more than likely win the race, but closer than 30 points is something that they definitely should be happy about, and it just goes to show that yes, if it's a state that is solid for the Republican Party, the result may end up being the same, but the Democratic Party was able to win more votes than they traditionally would have, and in a way, that's some type of moral victory for them. So looking at our map, I think the Democratic Party would do very, very well. Actually, before we get into the characterizations, I said that I would show you the 2018 results. Well, we know that Pennsylvania is up in 2022, and we actually see here that Bob Casey, the incumbent senator, won by 12 points here back in 2018. Actually, 13 points over his Republican opponent. In Wisconsin, Tammy Baldwin won by over 10 points back in 2018. So looking at both of these states, I wouldn't be too confident if I was on the GOP side in 2022 about potential victories here. With retiring incumbents, I would say at a minimum, these would be lean for the Democratic Party. At a minimum, they would be lean for the Democratic Party. On top of that, I can't imagine they do too well in Arizona. Back in 2018, Jackie Rosen was able to defeat Dean Heller, a Republican incumbent, by nearly 5 points. Actually, exactly 5 points. I thought I missed it by 0.1, but it was actually a 5-point margin of victory here. This was against an incumbent. Back in 2016, we saw Nevada go to a very similar margin as the presidential level, 2.4%. But the thing is, without Donald Trump on the ballot, minority voters are going to return to what they know best, Democratic support. And those white voters that turned away from Donald Trump will still have the same reason to turn away from him because Donald Trump will still be in office, which is exactly why 2018 was the best year for Democrats since 2016, at least in the House, and, in many ways in the Senate. They won the popular vote in the Senate by 20.2%. So looking at what happened here, the Democratic Party actually had some very interesting results and some very stellar performances, like holding on to West Virginia and Ohio and Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, despite all of them going to Donald Trump in 2016. Montana in the same group there, and Arizona flipping to the Democrats. So I think that Nevada would be considered a likely Democratic state. I think Arizona would be a lean Democratic state at least. Mark Kelly might be able to expand it. And where does this put the Democrats? Well, it puts them at 50 to 44, but we would also have to include potentially some other states. You see, what happened in 2018? Let's go ahead and look at those House election results here. What you'll notice is that in North Carolina, I don't know if we can actually get to exactly what I want to point out, but let's see. Scroll down 2018 House elections. I want to show you what happened in North Carolina. While the Democratic Party only won 3 seats in North Carolina, they practically won the popular vote in the state. And I mean that seriously. While the Republican Party did have the upper edge, that was because the Democratic Party did not field a candidate in the 3rd congressional district. If they did, they would have gotten around 33% of the support, and then, consequently, won the popular vote here in the state of North Carolina. The Republicans were able to win 10 seats here to the Democratic Party's 3, but the popular vote margin was just around 2 points for the GOP. With that 3rd district added in, the Democratic Party would have undoubtedly won the popular vote in North Carolina. Not just for that reason, but for many others, with North Carolina narrowing in the 2020 election, even under the assumption that Donald Trump wins the election. Looking at the results there, again, you're going to see some discrepancies. I just edited the page for visual purposes, but you'll notice that Hillary Clinton lost North Carolina by over 3 points, in 2016. And now, it went to Trump by just 1 point, 7%, 1.8%. So I think the Democratic Party would be in a pretty strong position, especially with a lot of energy on their side, to a point where North Carolina would actually be tilt Democratic in this election. And, despite Chris Sununu being widely popular, I think 2022 might be the year where we would see Maggie Hassan hold on to control in this Senate race. It certainly will be very competitive, and it certainly will be one of the most closely watched states. But Maggie Hassan has defeated electoral juggernauts before. Kelly Ayotte won her last election by over 20 points. She won with 60% of the vote. So it was a very substantial margin before, but Maggie Hassan ended up defeating her. While this mimicked the presidential election results, I am confident that it would also mimic the election results from 2020, but just narrow up slightly. I think that the Democratic Party will still be victorious, and I think that looking at the results here, I'm not super confident that the GOP would be able to put their governor in a position where he would be the front runner. I certainly think he will make it competitive, and I think he could win in 2022 under a Joe Biden presidency. But historically speaking, COVID-19 speaking, looking at 2018, all of the cards sort of stack up against Donald Trump to a point where New Hampshire, I would say, is lean Democratic, at least at this point, if not likely, but lean Democratic because of Chris Sununu. So this leaves us with 4 toss-up races, and the GOP, I think, will have a pretty strong advantage in some of them, but not enough that I would say, 100% these should be safe Republican states, as Iowa and Ohio were back in 2016, and Georgia was likely, and Missouri was lean. Well, we're going to start to see some of these characterizations shift depending on what state you're looking at. For starters, the Republican Party will still probably hold on to Missouri. That's a Democratic color. They will still probably hold on to Missouri, but with Eric Greitens running in this race, I don't think is it Greitens or Greitens? I said it yesterday. I can't entirely remember. I think it's Eric Greitens. Or is it Greitens? I'm going to say Greitens. No, I'm not. You know what? It doesn't matter. With him running, I think that if he ends up the Republican nominee, which it looks like he might be, unless the GOP does what they did to Chris Kobach in 2020, which means propping up someone who's a lesser-known Republican, but funneling a lot of money towards their primary campaign because they know one of these candidates can really make it competitive. I think it'll just be the Republican Party's luck, and as of right now, he seems to be the frontrunner, that he ends up the nominee. So Missouri, I think, could be close in 2022. But I'm not going to say lean. I'm going to say likely, just because of the state's partisan history, and there is no Democratic incumbent, and Jason Kander has already announced that he's not going to run. So I wouldn't be super hopeful if I was on the Democratic side, but I wouldn't exactly count out the fact that it would be not a safe state. Potentially lean, depending on the nominees. Iowa and Ohio, I think, could become very, very close. What we saw happen in 2018, let's see if we can find it here. Let's go ahead and go back to the 2018 elections, because there were governor elections in both of these states that actually might reveal a little bit about what it actually looked like in a wave year. So 2018 elections, let's go to the governor elections right here, and let's go ahead and focus on Iowa and Ohio. Well, Ohio went to the GOP, not by a lot, though. Not by a lot. Richard Cordray came very, very close. This was a 3.7% margin for the GOP in the state of Ohio. So looking at the margin here, I wouldn't be super solid if I was, I wouldn't be super secure if I was on the GOP side, because it was still pretty competitive. And while the GOP did have the advantage in both here and in Iowa, which we're going to get to in just a moment, you'll notice that in Iowa, the Republican Party was able to win by just under 3 points. They were very close races, and I think they will be close in 2022, but the GOP still had the upper hand. I think that's exactly what we would see here, even in a blue wave year. I think that the GOP will still have some type of advantage, but it's certainly much closer than it was under Trump in 2016 or under the 2010 Senate elections. They have gotten insanely closer because of the retiring incumbents, and I think at this point, the GOP will still end up winning, but not by a lot. And then the final state is the state of Georgia. This is a state where we have seen a lot of energy on the Democratic Party side, and we're under the assumption that Raphael Warnock has just defeated Kelly Loeffler in 2021, that this is a race in the minds of many American voters here. And I think that with Stacey Abrams on the ballot for governor, and she would undoubtedly win this governor position if we're talking about a 2022 wave, you would have to keep in mind, though, that Brian Kemp would not be attacked as much by Donald Trump, that, Brian Kemp would not be vilified, and Brad Raffensperger would be, potentially soaring to re-election here. But I think Brian Kemp is just in a very bad position looking at the state of Georgia. I think the Democratic Party will have a lot of energy on their side entering into 2022, and Georgia is the perfect state for it. So under that assumption, under this idea that Trump is at a negative love and approval rating on Election Day as he was in 2018. In fact, it could be worse if COVID-19 is not fully recovered, as it looks like it might be on the pathway to do ahead of 2022. But looking at Georgia, I will say we are talking about a lean Democratic characterization at a minimum, which means if Donald Trump was to be president, the GOP could see a complete reversal of what they saw happen in 2018, where they had 53 seats, and now they have 47, a complete switcheroo. And I think this would be very interesting, because what you'll notice is that, these races will be surprisingly competitive, and I actually haven't characterized all of the states that I think will narrow down. Florida will be closer. I think Florida will be closer. I think Marco Rubio will still have that victory there, but it'll be much closer. I mean, yes, Donald Trump was able to expand the state's margin in 2020, but they still can be competitive. I mean, just because you expand on a state, if Trump isn't on the ballot, we're not going to see the type of crossover support that we saw happen in 2020. It was also, not just crossover support, but Hillary Clinton voters from 2016 that just became solid Republican voters for the sake of 2020 because of this message from Donald Trump that Joe Biden is a socialist, or that Joe Biden is someone who is an extreme left-wing member of the Democratic Party. I mean, looking at the campaigning strategy here, any left-wing member of the Democratic Party can tell you Joe Biden's far from being an extreme left-wing Democratic Party member. But looking at what Donald Trump did, that's something that certainly resonated, specifically amongst Hispanic voters in the state of Florida. And it was a very elegant campaign strategy, and it ended up working, but not enough that he won. But under this assumption that he did win, I think that this is a strategy that won't exactly be able to be utilized fully against some of these Democrats, because, without Donald Trump on the ballot, you're not going to get the same type of energy for the GOP as you would if he was on the ballot. So I'm going to be under the assumption that we're going to see a narrowing up Florida in 2022, at least from what I'm expecting under President Biden here. And I think that the Democratic Party would be in a much better position for 2022, but that's not to say they aren't in our current timeline. So final map, 53 Senate seats for the Democrats, 47 for the Republican Party. A pretty resounding victory for the Democrats, an expansion of 3 seats with pickups in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2022 midterm election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.